Glenn Powell's silence about his messy breakup with Gigi Paris has finally been broken, and the truth behind why he chose Sydney Sweeney over his 3-year relationship is more shocking than anyone imagined. Now, Glenn hasn't come out and directly confessed to what we're about to reveal, but when you piece together Gigi Paris's explosive recent interviews with Glenn's own past admissions, a disturbing pattern emerges, and honestly, the evidence is so damning that it might as well be a confession. What we're hearing through industry whispers and connecting the dots from multiple sources suggests that Glenn didn't just fall under Sydney's spell. He made a calculated decision that his career was worth more than 3 years of love. And if these rumors are true, it means he knew exactly what he was doing when he chose fame over loyalty. Gigi Paris recently exposed how Glenn told her, "The producers and I discussed that it's best you don't come to Australia." But here's the other kicker that everyone missed. Sydney Sweeney was one of the producers. And that raises serious questions. Did she have a say in keeping Gigi away while they played up their fake romance for the cameras? Now, we can't confirm if this was all orchestrated from the beginning, but the timeline is suspicious as hell. Glenn's own words in interviews reveal a person who was willing to blur the lines between reality and fiction for success. He admitted it was easy to pretend to fall in love with Sydney, and that it became harder to differentiate between real life and fake life. The rumor mill is buzzing with speculation that Glenn deliberately chose to sacrifice his relationship on the altar of Hollywood ambition. And while we can't prove it definitively, when you look at all the evidence together, it paints a pretty damning picture. But that wasn't the whole story, and what happened next would expose the true cost of Glenn's choice. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to January 2023, when Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney were first cast in what would become the controversial romantic comedy Anyone But You. At this point, Glenn had been in a committed relationship with model Gigi Paris for 3 years. They were serious, the kind of serious where you talk about forever, where you build a life together, where you trust your partner completely. Sydney, meanwhile, was engaged to Jonathan Davino, though sources close to the situation suggest their relationship had been rocky for quite some time. Industry insiders whisper that Sydney wasn't particularly concerned about how her actions might affect her engagement, especially with someone as charming and ambitious as Glenn entering her orbit. The production moved to Australia in early 2023, and this is where things get interesting. Distance has a way of testing relationships, but what happened next suggests this wasn't just about physical separation. It was about deliberate choices. By April 2023, the first cracks began to show publicly. Gigi Paris unfollowed Sydney Sweeney on Instagram, sparking immediate speculation about trouble in paradise. Now, some sources tried to downplay this, claiming Gigi only unfollowed Sydney because Sydney never followed her back in the first place. But anyone who understands social media dynamics knows that's not how these things work, especially when your partner is working closely with someone day in and day out. The behind-the-scenes videos from the Australian set began circulating, and fans immediately picked up on the chemistry between Glenn and Sydney. But here's what's particularly telling. These weren't accidental leaks. These were carefully curated glimpses designed to generate buzz, and if the rumors are true, Sydney was the mastermind behind this strategy. During press interviews, the body language between Glenn and Sydney was unmistakable. Watch any of their joint appearances, and you'll notice the constant touching, the lingering glances, the way they seem to exist in their own bubble. Now, some might argue this is just professional chemistry, but industry veterans know the difference between acting and genuine attraction. When asked about their first meeting, their stories were inconsistent, almost rehearsed in their spontaneity. Sydney would reach over to touch Glenn during interviews, and he would light up in ways that suggested this wasn't just about promoting a movie. These are the kinds of interactions that make partners back home uncomfortable, and rightfully so. But the real revelation comes from what Gigi Paris has shared about this period. She describes feeling increasingly isolated and confused as Glenn's behavior changed. The person she had loved for 3 years was becoming someone she didn't recognize, someone who prioritized optics over their relationship. The breaking point came with that infamous phone call. Glenn contacted Gigi and told her, "I think it's best that you pause your trip coming to Australia because I don't think it'd be a good look to be seen with you." But here's the crucial detail that everyone seems to have missed. Glenn specifically mentioned that the producers and I have discussed this decision. Now, who was one of the main producers on Anyone But You? Sydney Sweeney herself? This means that Sydney had direct input into whether Glenn's girlfriend of 3 years could visit him during filming. Think about the power dynamics at play here. Sydney wasn't just Glenn's co-star, she was literally his boss in this situation. Gigi has described this phone call as the moment she fell out of love with Glenn. She realized that the person she had built a life with was willing to prioritize a movie's marketing strategy over her feelings and their relationship. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. What makes this even more troubling is the timeline. Right around the time Gigi was being told to stay away from Australia, Glenn and Sydney were ramping up their public appearances together. They were doing red carpet events, intimate interviews, and creating content that deliberately blurred the lines between their professional and personal relationships. The most damaging piece of evidence might be the ASMR pickup line video that went viral with over 24 million views. This wasn't something that just happened. Sydney later revealed that she personally pushed Sony to release this content because she really believed in it. At the same time, Gigi was being distanced from the set. Sydney was pushing intimate content with Glenn into the public spotlight. Listen to some of those pickup lines again. "What's your name again? I want to make sure I'm screaming out the right one tonight. Want to save water by showering together?" These aren't the kinds of things you do with a coworker when you're in a committed relationship, unless that relationship has already been sacrificed for career advancement. Glenn's own words during this period are particularly revealing. He admitted that it was very easy to pretend to fall in love with Sydney Sweeney, and that sometimes it's harder to differentiate between real life and fake life. For someone in a 3-year relationship, these are dangerous admissions. They suggest a person who was already emotionally checking out of their commitment. But perhaps the most telling detail comes from Gigi's description of the rules that were put in place during filming. When she finally did make it to Australia to confront Glenn in person, she was banned from the set and prohibited from being near any production activities. The only people with authority to make such rules, the producers, and yes, Sydney Sweeney was one of them. Gigi has described feeling like she was fed to the dogs during this period. She watched as the person she loved participated in a marketing campaign that painted her as the obstacle to a great romance. The narrative being pushed was that Glenn and Sydney were meant to be together, and Gigi was just collateral damage in their love story. The psychological impact on Gigi was severe. She describes being shattered by the experience, feeling small, and questioning her own worth. This is what happens when someone you trust participates in a campaign designed to erase you from the narrative of their life. What's particularly cruel is how Glenn handled the situation. According to Gigi, there were multiple instances where people were disrespectful to her in Glenn's presence, and he remained silent. He wouldn't stand up for her or acknowledge their relationship publicly because it didn't serve the movie's marketing strategy. The rumor mill suggests that Glenn made a calculated decision early in the filming process. He saw the potential for Anyone But You to be a massive success, and he recognized that playing into the romance rumors with Sydney could elevate his career to new heights. The question is whether he consciously chose to sacrifice his relationship for this opportunity. Industry insiders whisper that Glenn was seduced not just by Sydney's charm, but by the promise of what their partnership could do for his career. Sydney Sweeney was already an established star with significant influence in Hollywood. Aligning himself with her professionally and romantically could open doors that might otherwise remain closed. The success of Anyone But You seems to validate this strategy. The movie became a massive hit, earning over $220 million worldwide and establishing Glenn as a leading man in romantic comedies. But the cost was his 3-year relationship and, according to some, his integrity. What makes this situation even more complex is Sydney's role as both co-star and producer. She had the power to shape not just the movie's content, but its marketing strategy. If the rumors are true, she used this position to orchestrate a campaign that deliberately excluded Gigi from Glenn's life during filming. Sydney's own relationship with Jonathan Davino began falling apart around the same time. By March of 2024, she was deleting photos of their New Year's Eve kiss from her Instagram, and sources confirmed that their engagement was over. The timing suggests that Sydney was also making choices about what relationships were worth preserving and which ones could be sacrificed for career advancement. The aftermath has been telling. Glenn has continued to thrive professionally, landing major roles and establishing himself as one of Hollywood's most sought-after leading men. Sydney has similarly seen her career reach new heights, with multiple projects in development and her status as a producer giving her significant industry influence. But what about the human cost? Gigi Paris has had to rebuild her life after being publicly humiliated and privately betrayed. She's spoken about the difficulty of watching someone she loved participate in a campaign that painted her as irrelevant to his story. The broader implications of this situation extend beyond just one relationship. It reveals how Hollywood's marketing machine can consume real people's lives in service of profit. When the lines between authentic emotion and manufactured drama become blurred, real relationships become casualties of the entertainment industry. What's particularly disturbing is how this situation was handled with such calculated precision. This wasn't a case of two people falling in love unexpectedly. If the rumors are true, this was a strategic campaign designed to generate buzz for a movie, regardless of who got hurt in the process. Glenn's silence on the matter speaks volumes. He's never directly addressed the rumors about his relationship with Sydney or provided clarity about what really happened with Gigi. This silence allows the speculation to continue while protecting his carefully crafted public image. The question that remains is whether Glenn's choices were worth it. He gained a successful movie, elevated his career status, and potentially found a new romantic partner in Sydney. But he lost a 3-year relationship, damaged his reputation for loyalty, and participated in a campaign that caused real emotional harm to someone who loved him. Industry observers suggest that this situation represents a broader trend in Hollywood where authentic relationships are increasingly seen as obstacles to career advancement. The pressure to maintain certain images and narratives can lead people to make choices that prioritize professional success over personal integrity. For Gigi Paris, the experience has been a harsh lesson in how quickly someone can be erased from a narrative. When they no longer serve a useful purpose, her 3-year relationship was reduced to an inconvenience in the marketing campaign for Anyone But You. The most troubling aspect of this entire situation might be how normalized this behavior has become in Hollywood. The idea that relationships can be sacrificed for career advancement, that real emotions can be manipulated for marketing purposes, and that people can be discarded when they no longer serve a useful function. These have become accepted parts of the entertainment industry. As we look at the current status of everyone involved, the consequences of these choices become clear. Glenn has achieved professional success, but at the cost of his reputation for loyalty and integrity. Sydney has established herself as a powerful producer and star, but questions remain about the methods she used to achieve this success. In Gigi, she's had to rebuild her life after being publicly humiliated and privately betrayed by someone she trusted completely. Her story serves as a reminder that behind every Hollywood success story, there are often real people who pay the price for others' ambitions. The rumors around Glenn Powell's decision and how Sydney Sweeney may have played a part in ending his 3-year relationship are raising serious questions. If these whispers are true, they show us a person who was willing to sacrifice love for fame, loyalty for opportunity, and integrity for career advancement. Whether Glenn will ever publicly address these rumors remains to be seen. But the evidence suggests that his silence isn't about protecting privacy. It's about protecting a carefully constructed image that might not survive the truth. In the end, the real revelation isn't about what Glenn Powell finally said. It's about what his actions and his silence have already told us about who he really is.
Subscribe to my channel.